Hey, what's going on? Have you heard about our radio show? That's right, there's a medical marijuana radio show, and I do it for you every Thursday night at 8:30. In fact, the podcast is available ahead of time every week, and you can get it at 420lawoffice.com. Just click 420 Radio Show, and you can download the podcast, and you can subscribe by clicking a button, and it's going to show up in your phone or in your iPod. So be sure to check out 420 Law Office Radio. I think you'll find it's rocking. All right. Hello, this is Stuart Richland from 420 Law Office and here on the YouTube channel. Thank you very much for touching base. Well, here we are just about at the end of the third or fourth week of the new federal crackdown against medical marijuana, and there have been some interesting developments in the news I wanted to share with you. The first is Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is our Attorney General, and she came out asking and staking some ground here for state law, asking federal prosecutors to be careful not to overreach on their crackdown. She said she was worried that an overly broad federal enforcement campaign will make it more difficult for legitimate patients to access physician-recommended medicine in California, urging federal authorities to make sure their enforcement efforts are focused on significant traffickers of illegal drugs. So this was a terrific shot in the arm for a very, very ailing medical marijuana community now. Everyone is really worried about whether their collectives will be shut down. And then also this week, the California Medical Association chimed in, sort of doing the same thing. In their first broad marijuana policy statement, they not only call for medical marijuana, but they even call for legalization, claiming that the current federal approach has been a failed public health policy. And so does the AMA when you do your research. So it's remarkable that the federal government has still got marijuana scheduled in a way that's inconsistent with what the physicians in our country say. That being said, though, we don't really want to see marijuana scheduled into the pharmacies. I think the best thing is for marijuana to be descheduled. The reason relates in a very arcane way to prohibition. When you think about when we had prohibition of alcohol in this country, before prohibition was possible, there was a constitutional amendment. And there was no similar constitutional amendment for the illegalizing of marijuana. And for that reason, the illegalizing of marijuana itself is constitutionally suspect. There's an interesting argument that has been evolved along these lines. And if you are a criminal defense attorney, please contact me to share some of these defense ideas. The essence of it is that prohibition, this was something that was pointed out to me by a really bright lawyer about 4 years ago, that the prohibition amendment was necessary because otherwise prohibition would have impaired many contracts. And by doing it by a constitutional amendment, it was able to be done and not constitute an impairment of contract, which would be a violation of the Constitution because it itself would be at a constitutional level. But cannabis, farmers, medicine, patent medicine manufacturers at the time were using cannabis as a major ingredient, and so were the major companies like Eli Lilly and Squibb, etc. They all had medical marijuana. So why were their contracts impaired? It's a really significant question, and if that was done unconstitutionally, as we know it was, and if you've heard my interview with James Fetzer, the great professor of logic and critical thinking, I went over with him in an hour the marijuana controversy. I'm going to put a link over here so that you can check that out. Also, since the federal government has, even in its own memoranda, emphasized the significance of the caregiver defense, I'd like to make sure that you know all about the caregiver defense and how individual rights as well as caregiver rights are protected by state law, and how those activities, apparently when legally followed, will at least be a low priority for the federal government to prosecute. The caregiver defense requires that the caregiver have a pre-existing relationship with the caregivee in which he cares for his health, safety, or housing. And we go over that in great detail in our 1-hour consultation. Give me a holler anytime, and let's get that consultation in the books and get you in here to our Hollywood office, and let's talk about medical marijuana law.